As part of IRMSA's thought leadership for its members, the organization releases a bi-weekly risk article. These articles are important. They're written by members who work with IRMSA, and our most recent article is on strategy, risk, and resilience. I'm going to talk to the author of that article, Risk Intelligence Committee member, Simon van Wyk. A very warm welcome to you. First of all, just a quick introduction, if you don't mind, and why the subject is important to you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that one, Jeremy. I mean, I guess my biggest observation as a risk professional has been actually twofold. One is that risk in itself is a non-linear concept. But if you look at the methods and approaches and things that often get deployed or put into place, they're very linear. And you then realize that you're having these risks and things that are manifesting that, truly it's a problem. So it means basically we need to start changing the way that we think. That's the one part. The other part with the strategy is that I've seen so many brilliant blueprints, strategies, and when you look at the state of what I call contextual flux, it's quite vigorous. And what amazes me is that there's no uncertainty blueprint behind that strategy. So I see that disconnect. And I guess that would be my first response on that one, Jeremy.
Simon, that's an important answer, and I fully understand what you're saying. I want to come back to this phrase non-linear, if I can. If that's the case, how then do risk professionals need to rethink? How do they need to recalibrate? Because you'll tell me how strategies fail sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely great. And it's something that I want to say I've dedicated probably the last 10, 12 years of my career to, which was interestingly spawned by the kidnapping of my daughter, which changed my perspective of risk completely. And it was that context hasn't been appreciated enough. So to, I guess, answer the question around how do you actually manage context or complexity, international best practice does give us some guidance. And basically what they're saying is consider your internal and your external factors. And what I found is that people just don't spend enough time doing that. So if you do spend time just really understanding, well, where does your organization sit within what its aspiration is, its objectives, and you kind of, let's say, take cognizance of the environment around you in terms of what you can and can't control, you can actually adapt your strategy to morph with that context. So I guess the point that I want to land is that often the outputs of a risk could be used as an input to strategy, but it is quite a disruptive way of thinking about it.
Typically, where would things be most fluid then? And what should risk professionals be looking for in that respect?
Yeah, so my view on that is, firstly, people often assume that they must react to context. Things will happen around us, things will happen to the company, and we will react. So there will be things like, risk management in place, business continuity management in place, crisis management, those sorts of things. And that's all great from a reactive perspective, and we need it. They're essential. But I think where there's an improvement needed is are you taking that conversation up front in terms of the value proposition of true risk management when you're setting up your strategies? Okay, so what I mean by that statement is it doesn't help to always be in a reactive mode or even just have people, processes, and systems as we typically know in place for that. You need to bring it up front so that when you're actually considering, let's give you a tangible example. If I were to take the shifting geopolitics, it happens across the world. If you have a business that's in multiple geographies, for example, you would sit with a dynamic that is completely different per country, per territory, wherever you may have your operation. So if you can understand that context better and input that into your strategy or decisions and call it the morphology of your strategy, you're going to be in a much better place, as opposed to saying, this is our standard strategy. This is just what we're going to do. In many cases, it just doesn't work.
So the reactive side is one aspect of this. The other side is looking ahead to the unknowns. To what extent then does data play a role and predictive analytics?
Yeah. Data is crucial, and it can be used in many different ways. You know, there's a good saying, well, we all know the saying, I think if you can measure it, you can manage it. We've all heard that one before. But one that I like to cite is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And why I'm making that statement is that as risk practitioners, we can only use the tools that we have, and the outputs of those tools would be the data. Where I would say we need to focus on is the integrity of that data and also how we use it. Now, what's nice about technology, of course, it's evolving faster than any other sector. So we can very much be in a position where we get to leverage that data and actually look for trends. And that's where the answer sits with context. One would argue that if you're looking at a trend, that's historical data, but you can match that with where it is that you're wanting your business to go. So to give you a good example, if you want to expand a business in South Africa and there's, let's say, some contextual change and the data that you've got on hand, it could be about things like warehousing, logistics, even social ingress. All these things make a difference, and it could help you to plan better if you have that data on hand. But the true value is in the integrity. Don't just have data for the sake of data.
So where do risk managers now need to start having a rethink?
Right at the start. I mean, the risk management fraternity has absolutely evolved leaps and bounds over the years. I mean, if you think, well, as a profession from the kind of 70s onwards, things were quite systems risk orientated. Where I find that we're at the moment is that because we've got all this data, it's almost like sometimes we have too much data and we don't know what to do with it. So to me, I would say you need to start the conversation as early in the process as possible. And there's a reason for this, Jeremy. The reason is that risk professionals must remember why they're actually at the table. And why are we at the table? We're at the table because we are the individual in the team that must have the best handle on uncertainty at that given time. So if there's any question around what is the value of strategy, call it risk and resilience, which has been the topic of this particular risk chat, you really do need to understand that as risk professionals, we need to have the best handle on uncertainty. Because if we don't, then, you know, what value are we bringing to that part of the equation? And it's always in flux, always in flux.
It's predicated on an entirely different set of skills. My question to you would be whether there are sufficient skills to build the model, the future model that you're talking about.
Yeah, so there was a very interesting study that was undertaken about the skills that are needed in 2015 versus the skills needed in 2020. I appreciate that's now a little bit dated, being 2 years on. But what was interesting to me was that I think there's softer skills that the risk professionals are now requiring beyond, let's say, the traditional view of just analytics, STEM, basically. We need to have more cognitive connection. And the reason for that is that there's well over 200 biases. Okay, there's a bias spectrum, and we find that when we're trying to get information out of people, you can imagine if you're trying to establish what are the risks, what are the contingencies for those risks, you're limited often to the people around the table or to the data that you have on hand. So what we're finding now is that you need a deeper cognitive connection, because the biases in that room will shape the output of your risk profile. And that in itself is a problem. So I think just as a broad term for the viewers is we need more effort, more time on understanding the cognitive connection, because we have a lot of neurodiversity across whoever we engage with. And it's like that consistently around the world. So yeah, I do think that's the part where we need to focus now. Connection is more important than ever.
Simon, I wonder then if you could expand on the concept of contextual flux. And first of all, what do you mean by that? And then what would need to happen to inform better operations around that, if you get what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. Look, fantastic question. I think this is a part as well where risk professionals maybe haven't spent enough time. As we've mentioned earlier in the conversation, there's often quite a reaction to context. So what do I mean by contextual flux? Contextual flux, just basic, it's a simple term for saying that things are always evolving, always changing around us. And if you read the article or the risk chat, there was a little story there about sometimes in business, it's better to be a chameleon. Because if a shark dares to stop swimming, it will die. So what's important about this is that we've all heard about IQ, right? Your intelligence quotient. We've all heard about EQ, your emotional quotient. The kind of new train of thought was that we all, at this point, given the rate of change that we have in our world, we need a high AQ, which is the adaptability quotient. And absolutely agree with that. But when I look through the critical lens as a risk professional to the adaptability quotient, I kind of came up with a concept that I think really holds true. And it's something we need to go and test ourselves with as professionals, is that the adaptability quotient needs to be either less or at least equal to our certainty quotient. Okay, what I mean by certainty quotient is, as soon as you adapt to any situation with a low view on certainty, in effect, there's a high chance that you're going to be introducing even more risk into your situation. So maybe just as a key takeaway for the audience is, if you're going to adapt, do so, but with a good degree of certainty. If you don't, you'll be introducing risk.
Simon van Wyk, such excellent insight there. Thank you very much for talking to me.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for your time, Jeremy.